Hello and welcome to Raw Chatter. I am your host speaking, Vicky Midwood, integrative health, nutrition and lifestyle coach, and of course, the addiction eliminator. And I have got a fantastic guest with me today, folks, who's got a really interesting story about how she got to do what it is that she does. So, Dana Chapman is a really highly specialized nutritional therapist. She specializes in ADHD. She also has a real flair for helping people to understand the gut brain axis and just what that means in terms of gut health, but also in terms of mental health. So, Dana, I am so excited for this episode because you've got so much to share, especially around how ADHD and disordered eating and eating disorders manifest, amongst other things. So, over to you. The floor is yours. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Vicky. It's such a pleasure to be here. So you want me to dive into how I got into...
just dive into how you got here. And obviously people will detect there's a bit of an accent there as well. So if you want to tell them where you're from.
Absolutely. I am very proudly Zimbabwean. So I came from Africa. I grew up on a farm in the middle of Zimbabwe. And did my first university degree in South Africa, actually. So people get very confused as to where my accent actually comes from, whether it's South Africa or Zimbabwe, or some people even say Australia. But no, proudly Zimbabwean. And yes, so I am a nutritional therapist. It is a second career for me, but I started being interested in health and wellbeing and nutrition when I was a teenager, playing lots of sport, but I was a bit overweight. I didn't like the way that I looked or felt. And so I thought, how can I change the way that I look in a way that is going to be supportive of me still being able to play hockey 6 days a week? Wow. And so I started reading up about how to become healthy, because I thought if I become healthy, then surely I will lose a little bit of weight and feel a bit better. And I was just so fascinated about learning about foods and what they actually did for your body, and that you could eat certain foods and they could give you energy. And I was like, absolutely, I need energy. Yeah. So I will start eating those foods. So that's sort of where the interest started. But as you do, your first university degree is always in something like accounting. Mine was. And thought that I was going to go down that path, and then ended up in consulting and ended up working for one of the big 4 consulting firms. But I met a nutritional therapist, and when she told me what she did, I said, that is my absolute dream job. How did you do it? And she told me, and within a couple of weeks, I had enrolled in the course. And then it was a long 7 years, 2 children, and a job later, I then fully qualified as a nutritional therapist.
Right.
And yeah,
I'm just going to jump in here and just for people listening, because I know that there is some confusion in a lot of people's heads between what is a dietitian, what is a nutritionist, and what is a nutritional therapist, because they are not all of the same, are they?
No, they are not. There are massive differences. And it's funny how different emphasis is placed on the value of different things as well. So I think we've placed a lot of value on dietitians, and absolutely necessarily so. But dietitians often focus on specific conditions and then a diet that is important for that condition. Nutritionist will talk just about food and about how you can fuel your body in the correct way, or how you can eat in a certain way, again, probably for a specific condition or a specific outcome that you want. Nutritional therapy looks at health as a whole and looks at a person and sees their symptoms and tries to understand what the root cause of those symptoms is. And it's normally due to an imbalance in a system of the body, one or more systems of the body. So I always look at it in terms of a systems-based approach and a symptoms, and being curious about when did the symptoms start, how has it manifested, and how long have you been struggling with it for? But what was the root cause of that symptom, and trying to address that through, yes, nutrition, so what you eat really counts, but also lifestyle, sleep, movement, all of them come into play when you're talking about a holistic health for someone. So I don't just talk about food, and that's
No.
one of the first things I try and tell people when I say I'm a nutritional therapist, because that's often the misconception, is that I'll just talk about food. Yes,
Yes.
food is a big part, but it's that bigger picture as well. What is your physiology saying? What is your genetics and your genetic predisposition?
Mm.
How are you moving? How are you sleeping? What stresses are you exposed to? Because all of those have a role to play in how we feel.
Excellent. And it's not just in how we feel, but it's also how the body then deals with the food that we are actually giving it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
it's more of a science based upon the individual,
Yeah,
as opposed to this is the diabetes diet, this is the, the heart
yeah,
attack, post heart attack diet, and all that kind of thing, which is where
yeah.
a dietitian kind of more or less goes down. And
Mm.
and so you were in the big four, you were in the city, you've had family, suddenly you've done this long training, and you then diversify even more kind of niching down. So what made you kind of go more into the whole ADHD and nutritional therapy side of things?
Good question. I actually wanted to specialize in it when I first qualified, because I was part of an occupational therapists networking group. And I suppose this is how I've specialized in everything that I have over the 3 years that I have been in business. It's circumstantial and what's happening at that particular point in time. And I just saw through this occupational therapy group that they were talking about amazing things, but nobody was talking about, okay, well, for example, with autism, what can you actually do with the physiology to help
Yeah,
support the symptoms that somebody is having?
right.
But I was given the advice that I shouldn't niche too soon, so quickly. So actually, the first niche that I had was more in mental health. And it was
Right.
because when I was transitioning out of the corporate world and into nutrition, mental health was being spoken about a lot more.
Yes.
But they were talking about yoga and meditation and talking therapies and all those sorts of things, instead of, again, what can somebody do practically on a daily basis with something that they're actually already doing, which is eating, or speaking about gut and how the gut is functioning.
Mm.
Nobody was speaking about that side, about the physiology, about why somebody has reached a point of having a mental health condition.
So that
Um,
drew you to that side of things, which kind of makes sense, I'm guessing, because you've been in that sort of corporate environment,
mm,
and you will have seen, no doubt, people struggling with mental health issues as well as physical issues.
yeah, absolutely. And the amount of stress that you see in the Big Four is absolutely massive. I mean, people are working copious amounts of hours and grabbing a Malteser's pack because they missed lunch.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where I think, it's Mark Hyman that said, food is either your medicine or your poison, isn't it? And
Mm,
we don't necessarily realize, or we didn't, that it's becoming more widely accepted now that
mm.
what we actually put into our bodies affects how our brain works and affects our mental health. And this is not new, though, is it? As you know from doing your study, it's very old information.
It is, but it's amazing how long it takes for the information to actually come out into physical practice. I mean, think about the gut brain axis that also has been in play for a very, very long time, and we're only just starting to speak about it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, which is kind of mind-boggling, isn't it, really? Because physiology and psychology have to go together, because we're not disconnected from there downwards, are we? So why specifically
Exactly.
ADHD? Was it
A
autism
very
that
good
kind of...
question.
Yeah, because I mean, ADHD at the moment, there are so many people, and I think this is why I was excited to have you on, because there are so many people who are reading so much stuff about
Mm,
ADHD, and
mm,
there's a lot of folks who are almost poo-pooing it now as a diagnosis, because it seems to be, in inverted commas, trendy.
mhm,
But the reality is, for people with autism, with any kind of neurodiverse issue,
mhm,
food is actually quite a big thing, isn't it?
It is. And it's a big thing because people with ADHD or autism may struggle with it,
Mm,
but their physiology means that you really need to actually focus on the quality of food that is going into your body, because your body and brain may not be able to create things like your neurotransmitters, so that dopamine, serotonin, that motivation center, that feel good hormone. Your body doesn't make those as effectively as a neurotypical person does. And it's a lot more complicated than that. So you can go into, is it actually making it, or is it not clearing it properly? And that's where your symptoms lie. So just to cycle back to your question, why did I decide to go into it? So ADHD was being spoken about a lot more, and I could see that in social media. I could see it. I mainly hang out on LinkedIn. I could see it a lot there. And again, people are talking about, ADHD coaches, which are amazing. Or, am I going to go down the medication route, or am I not going to go down the medication route? And I've always wanted to come in supporting people more naturally.
Right.
I think people get a diagnosis these days, and the opportunity, or what they get told at the end of the consultation, is you can either try medication or go and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah. Or not, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Carry on as you were, or try medication. And I think that there's so many things that you can do to support yourself and your physiology, that we really are wanting to fill that gap of, let's educate people on how you can support yourself. If you're on medication, absolutely fine. And if it's working for you, that's absolutely amazing and great for you as well. But I've done specific genetic testing on some people, and dopamine, for example, is not potentially not their issue, but that's where medication works. So medication doesn't work for everyone. What are your options if it doesn't? Or even if you're on medication, you can make it more effective,
Right,
by doing the diet and lifestyle stuff as well.
And I think that's a really key point for you to talk about, because everybody immediately, well, people who actually understand a little bit about ADHD know that it's something to do with the dopamine system and it not functioning in the same way as a neurotypical person. But when we look at ADHD, when we look at autism, it's a spectrum, isn't it? And everybody's kind of manifestation of it is completely different. So as you said, for some people the medication may work and it's great, but for other people it won't, and they need to know that there's plenty of other things that they can look at, and food is one of those. You mentioned their quality of food. Do you want to touch on that a little bit more?
Yes. I mean, I listened to a podcast once, and I think they said it perfectly, where she said there's no junk food. There's either food or there's junk. And I think we've grown up in a society where we feel like food is fuel, or it's breakfast time, I need to eat something, I will just reach for whatever is easiest, rather than thinking about actually, what am I putting on my plate, and what are the quality nutrients that are coming through in that.
Right.
A lot of people are eating refined foods these days, which is having a massive impact on the gut and the gut microbiome, which is having a massive impact on our brain health and brain function. So that's sort of what I mean about quality. And it's also about thinking about, the quality of each meal.
Right.
Do you have ingredients on your plate that are full of nutrients that your body needs to create the things that it needs for you to function optimally?
And that's a really powerful way of putting it, because everybody wants to function optimally, whatever that looks like for them. And often they don't make the connection with not remembering things or feeling a bit overwhelmed, which are all classic signs of ADHD, but other people get it as well. And fatigue. And there's a big disconnect with, I look at my sleep, maybe I'm not sleeping very well, or I've got too much on my plate in terms of things to do, rather than actually looking at their plate.
Yes, exactly. And all of those elements that you spoke about has a food element to it, doesn't it? I mean, sleep, people don't connect the fact that they're not sleeping well to and imbalanced blood sugar levels throughout the day, for example.
Right. And
Mm.
these are the things that you help people to kind of join the dots with when you work with them. And I guess in a simple way, so that you obviously understand the science behind the gut brain connection and the axis and everything that's going on, but they just need to go and practice in practical terms, don't they? Perhaps making different food choices or eating at different times. And those are all things that I'm guessing they just need your guidance to help them to understand what to do, how to do it.
Yeah, I think whenever we're trying to make a change, if you understand the reason why you're doing it, that gives you a little bit more motivation to actually start making a change. And then it's about cycling back. So great, you've made the change, but unless you're checking in with your body and noticing the impact that that change has made, you may not then realize the actual impact that it's having.
Right.
So I think it often goes when people take supplements, doesn't it? They've seen something amazing advertised somewhere that was marketed that would have X amount of benefits for taking X supplement,
Yeah.
and you start taking it. But unless you're reflecting on, is this actually working or not, you'll give up after a month because you don't know if it's helped or not, or exactly why you were taking that medication. So I think the same needs to be done for food. We don't often sit after a meal and think, how does my body feel? Am I tired this afternoon? Could it be to do with the fact that I had X for lunch? Or, is it because I didn't sleep well last night? So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
these are really powerful questions. And even just that knowing what questions to ask is why it's so important to work with somebody. And I think one of the things that I have noticed with working with people with ADHD is that bulimia tends to be something that is quite common with people with ADHD. Can you help us to understand why those two things almost go together?
Good question. I am not trained in eating disorders, so I will say that up front. A lot of nutritional therapists are, which is great. But I think it comes down to a number of things. I often talk to people about in ADHD, or people who have ADHD often suffer from what's called poor interoception,
Right.
which is the feelings inside your body of being hungry or not, being thirsty or not, needing the toilet or not, and all of those sorts of things, which can mean that you may go the whole day without eating.
Yeah.
And if you go the whole day without eating, you will get to the end of the day and you will absolutely demolish anything in sight.
Right.
And often your body is just so craving some fuel that it will cause you to crave foods that are high in fat and or sugar, because that's a quick release of energy for the body.
Yeah.
And if that happens and you do then end up going and gorging on some food, then especially if you're female, you may feel awful after that. And
Mm.
that brings about the want or need to purge
Yeah.
after that. So I
Which is
often tie it into that poor interoception.
and I think for the majority of people who are struggling with that I think will definitely make sense for them.
Mm,
There's another very interesting side of ADHD in the whole food thing. Well, there's a couple of things actually that I wanted to touch on. One of them being that a lot of people who have ADHD will go through phases of
mm.
having she's smiling, one
Mm,
food that they're kind of obsessed with until they just don't want it anymore.
yeah.
Um, and is that something that A is going to cause them a problem in terms of how they are coping with their ADHD? And B, should we worry about it, or is that just, one of the traits that happens?
I think I hear this a lot in people that I deal with as well, that they have one food that they're happy to eat
All the time.
until kingdom come.
Yeah.
But then, yes, they do get bored of it at one stage.
Mm.
Now, is it a problem? Can be, potentially. It may be that that meal is giving your body what it needs.
Right.
And so after that meal, you get the dopamine release, you get the serotonin release, and that keeps you coming back to that meal because it's safe and you know that it's going to give you what it needs. So potentially that meal is providing the nutrients that your body needs. But the problem that I have with having the same meal over and over again is you're not getting any variety, or you're getting minimal variety in your diet. And we know that the gut and the gut microbiome love to thrive off a variety of foods. And so you may be doing your gut microbiome a disservice if you are eating the same foods week in and week out.
Which
So
makes sense, yeah.
yeah, so I like to say, if it's the overwhelm that you're trying to take away by just having the same meal, that you're going to have that meal every day. It's simple and it takes some overwhelm away. One small tip that I like to give is, why don't you plan each day of the week is a certain protein and you mix up the things around it. So for example, a Monday dinner will be chicken, a Tuesday dinner will be fish, a Wednesday dinner might be lamb, a Thursday dinner might be fish again. And if you start getting into that sort of way of thinking, then that might help reduce the overwhelm of, every day thinking, oh my gosh, what is it going to be for dinner? So at least you're getting a little bit of variety in.
Yeah.
And try throw something new in. Maybe it's a handful of seeds that you add in that's going to be different, or you add half a tin of chickpeas or lentils or something like that to a meal that just starts to bring in a little bit of variety to it.
Fabulous, really practical. And I think that for a lot of people listening, that sounds simple, because that is the fear, isn't it? If it's going to be complicated and I've got a lot of things to remember, I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on as well, and it's along the same kind of lines, but it's more to do with texture of certain foods. And ARFID is something that it tends to be, it's not always people with ADHD, it just tend to be people who have autism, but of course it's a spectrum, isn't it? And so for those people who are listening who don't know what ARFID is, it stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. And that can often be because there's been a bad experience, because maybe they've choked on certain foods. But oftentimes with ADHD, it's a texture, isn't it? It's a mouthfeel thing. So can you, because they often have that with clothing and material as well, can you explain a little bit more about that and how we can try and help them to not be scared of certain foods?
I think the advice that I always give when it's a texture or an experience type food is always to bring that a new food in that you potentially don't like the texture of, with something that you are already having that is a safe food. Again, eating disorders is not really my area of specialty, but these are the small tips that I do give when people talk about textures and having that difficulty with textures, starting with really, really small amounts and having it in and or alongside a meal that is a safe meal.
Brilliant. That's really, really helpful. And so help people to understand just from a nutritional point of view, because ADHD, the gut, the brain, inseparable. So and it's such an important thing for people to recognize that we know that a lot of the neurotransmitters are made in the gut. So why is nutrition so important if we have got issues with our brain function, whether it's for ADHD or any other, to be fair, mental health issue?
I always say food is nutrients, and our bodies need nutrients to be able to create those neurotransmitters. So when you're thinking about ADHD, or you're thinking about mental health, because the neurotransmitters are often the same. You're talking about dopamine, you're talking about serotonin, you're talking about GABA and glutamate. Food contains nutrients. We need those nutrients to be able to make our neurotransmitters. We need good gut health and gut function to be able to break down those foods effectively and then release, and therefore be able to release the nutrients from it. But like you said, the gut microbiome is also so key for making our neurotransmitters. And the gut microbiome needs a specific diet for it to be optimal. It needs a diet, again, that is diverse, that is rich in fiber, not too high in protein, not too low in protein. I mean, there's so many different things that you can talk about when it comes to the gut microbiome, but specifically those whole foods is what the gut and the gut microbiome thrive off of. And it's the refined foods that often give you that short serotonin or dopamine boost that are detrimental to the gut microbiome as well. So if you're thinking about gut-brain axis, if you're thinking about gut health in terms of managing your ADHD, nutrition is so key, because nutrition is the answer to a gut microbiome that is robust and diverse and is going to support good mental health and function.
Brilliant. So you mentioned there, and I think we can all fall a little bit guilty of thinking that everybody understands what a refined food is and what a whole food is. And I'm hoping that the majority of people do, but just in case people are not quite sure, what is a whole food? How do people understand what that term means?
I always say if it has grown in the earth, so it's come up through the ground, so you're thinking fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, lentils, or it has run on the ground or swum in the sea, so all of your animal proteins, then those are whole foods. You can see an apple has been picked from the tree and it looks like an apple.
Yeah.
You go and get some apple juice, that is processed. Mother Nature did not give it to us in that form. So refined foods is a food has gone through some sort of process to get it from where it came from originally to the form that you're buying it in. So anything generally in a packet or tub or tin, tin's not so much, but a packet or a tub there's going to be some processing in it. Now, not minimally processed foods may be beneficial. So, for example, yogurt or cheese is minimally processed, but it still has a lot of value, nutritional value to it. But something like a white refined flour that has had some vitamins added back into it, that is a refined food and refined foods, your body doesn't really know what to do with it because it's not in its whole form. So that's sort of how I.
Yeah, no, that is really good. And I think, for a lot of people, they sort of know, but sometimes it's just nice to have it clarified a little bit, but especially by somebody who is a nutritional therapist and they go, yeah, I heard it from a specialist, which is great. So if you were to give people a key list of the most important nutrients to be focusing on, and just a simple way of getting them into their weekly diet, because I think that's another thing, isn't it, to kind of home in on. People get so bogged down with each meal and each day, but I think it's usually easier, do you agree, for people to look at a week rather than trying to struggle each day to think of what shall I eat and am I getting everything in?
Yeah, agreed, because it can be quite something to think about things in just one day. So key nutrients that may be useful for somebody with ADHD are B vitamins, omega-3, which is found in oily fish, and you can get it in things like walnuts and ground flax seeds and chia seeds, and zinc. Those are the three key nutrients that I would say are imperative to being able to make our neurotransmitters, but to some extent also to detoxify and get rid of them, which is also an important process. Animal meat for me and oily fish are the absolute key ingredients. So I'm not a fan of being vegan if you have ADHD. There will be a lot of people that disagree with me.
I'm not one of them. I'm wholeheartedly agreeing with you.
Yeah. So animal meat, and it's because animal meat has got all of the nutrients that your brain needs to be able to create dopamine and to detoxify it. So it's got B vitamins, it's got iron, which is important for brain health and brain function. It's got zinc, which is important for dopamine production and dopamine removal. And I said it's got B vitamins, didn't I? And B vitamins are important for creating energy, but also for creating our neurotransmitters. I would throw in there nuts and seeds.
Right.
Because nuts and seeds have zinc in them. They have a little bit of magnesium, which is important, but they also help balance your blood sugar levels. And we've not really spoken about it, but a constant, steady flow of glucose to the brain is what the brain needs to be able to focus and function optimally throughout the day. So I love using nuts and seeds. So animal protein, make that a source at least every dinner, having something that's got animal protein in it, oily fish at least 3 times a week.
Great.
And then some nuts and seeds thrown in there. And something else that I would add would be beans and lentils.
Right.
And again, because they are loaded with nutrients that are important for our neurotransmitters. So you're thinking iron, you're thinking B vitamins, you're thinking a little bit of zinc in there as well. But also, I love using beans and lentils because they're high in fiber and therefore they feed the gut microbiome. So you might want to think, yes, so important. So you might want to think about, a dinner that you used to make just with chicken. You could do half and half. Let's throw a tin of chickpeas into a dish that you're making that's got chicken in it as well. If you're having a lunch, a half a tin of beans or lentils is so easy to throw into a soup or onto a salad.
Right.
And then obviously
this is where you were saying that tinned, a lot of tinned foods are actually really, really helpful. Yes, there's been some processing, but minimal processing, and just the ease of having them available to just throw in without you having to go to all the trouble of soaking them and all that kind of stuff. Just makes them accessible for everybody, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a food that's not really going to go off in your cupboard. So I think a lot of people with ADHD buy some amazing food, but then it goes off because it's all fresh and they haven't used it in the week. Something like a tin of chickpeas in the cupboard will last a couple of years.
Right, exactly. And you mentioned there blood glucose, blood sugar levels. Let's just go back on that because it's something that I think people have gotten so confused with, so much misinformation out there. We went through a phase, didn't we, where you got to eat every 2 hours to keep your blood glucose level balanced. Do you remember that? And so people have gotten into this habit of just like grazing all of the time.
The day.
And wondering then why they've got issues with excess body fat that they don't really want, and not being able to sleep because they're still grazing right up until bedtime. And so help people to understand just why it is important to balance our glucose levels, but why that also doesn't mean you have to eat all the time.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of reasons why it's important to balance blood glucose levels. One is energy. So if you have a stable level of glucose coming through in the body, it means that your body can handle that glucose. It doesn't need to secrete huge amounts of insulin, which can put you on, if you have an insulin spike, you then may have a blood glucose dip, which means that you may feel tired or lack energy or crave something sweet to eat. So for stable energy levels, you want a stable blood glucose level. And like I mentioned, for the brain needs that steady flow of glucose through it to enable you to focus. It's also really important for sleep. So there's 3 reasons. And keeping our blood sugar levels stable throughout the day, I mean, the food industry has really done one over on we need to be snacking every 2 hours, because the foods that really hit that are high fat, high sugar foods, which are going to spike your blood glucose levels, which means that you do need to eat 2 hours later because your blood sugar levels have absolutely crashed.
Yeah.
So just making sure that every meal has got a good source of protein and fat in it is going to help balance your blood glucose levels and help satiate you for at least 4 hours. Now, that's really important when it comes to gut health. So many people are having gut health symptoms these days because the gut never has a break from processing food that you're putting down your throat. So really having those 4 hours is important for for gut health. But you're also wanting those 4 hours because you're wanting to keep your blood sugar levels stable. And if you're focusing on fat and protein at each meal, you should be able to go those 4 hours without the need to eat.
Right. And I think that's such key information, because for a lot of people, they are, as you say, finding that after a couple of hours, they're wanting something else. And that's because the food that they've chosen has given them a massive glucose hit, and then they get a massive dip because the insulin comes in, and they're just literally on this roller coaster, which saps their energy. But also, if you've got ADHD, it affects how the brain is functioning, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So for people who perhaps think that they would like to have a specialist chat with you and really get in depth as to their issues, how do they find you? Whereabouts are you hanging around? You've mentioned LinkedIn, but where else?
I am mainly on LinkedIn. I do have an account on Instagram that I'm trying to get into a little bit more. But I do have a website as well that people feel free to go on there. I have a few ADHD resources that hopefully are going to be of a lot of benefit and use for anyone.
Fantastic. And I think it's so important for people to recognize that we take food for granted, don't we? It's and a lot of times for people with ADHD, it's a bit of a faff, and it's something that they don't really want to do. But when we can start to look at it more from it's helping our brain to function better, and therefore you will feel better viewpoint. Hopefully that can help them to shift how they feel and look about it. What is the one thing that you would like people to walk away from this episode with?
I would love people to walk away with hope that they can help manage their symptoms more naturally. That medication doesn't always have to be the answer. And if it is the answer, then that's great. But it does come with its side effects, and it does come with its costs. So I really hope that people walk away with some hope and motivation to want to make a change to help themselves to feel better.
Fantastic. Excellent. So there you go, folks. We will put all of the links to where you can find Dana on the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, it will be in the description. So everything to do with nutrition, with ADHD, she's the person to get in touch with. And as always, I'm going to leave you with this, folks. We only have one life, as far as we know, and one body. So please look after it, because it is looking after you. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.